We welcome you to Fresh Start Scotland. Come and join us at Fresh Start Scotland.
All right, tonight we're going to look at the heart of man versus the heart of Christ. The other day we were talking about pride being one of the big issues that we face, and we were discussing on that, and thought I'll touch a bit on that and look into some of the sins of our heart, but also some of the virtues. Basically, kind of a comparison between the heart of man and the heart of Christ. And the heart of man represents all that is sinful, the heart of Christ, all that is virtuous and godly. All of us are in a process of transformation. That's what God is doing. And through the Bible, I kind of look at four statements which kind of brings the Bible in a nutshell, which is basically God formed us, sin deformed us, Christ transformed us, and we are conformed to the image and likeness of Jesus, because our journey is towards Christ likeness. Now, how does all that happen? And where do we start? We start with looking at our own hearts. And so, if you can turn with me to Jeremiah chapter 17 and verses 9 to 10. Jeremiah 17, verses 9 to 10, where the Bible talks about the whole issue. Somebody said the heart of the human problem is the problem of the human heart. And so we got to look at what our heart is and see what is our problem and what is the solution. How do we move from the heart of man to the heart of Christ? Jeremiah 17, verses 9 and 10, it says this: the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? And then in verse 10 says, I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind, and to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds. So here you have God kind of giving the problem and the solution. God kind of giving the diagnosis of the problem and the prescription right there. And so as we come before God and we look at our own problems, we look at the problems of the world, it boils down to issues of the heart. And when we say heart, we're not talking about the heart that pumps blood. We're not talking about the heart that's beating. We're talking about heart, which in the Hebrew understanding, the Jewish understanding, when it refers to the heart, is basically the core of our being, the real me, the real you. It's what we are really. Okay, so the heart, the core that's there within us, the heart is deceitful above all things. And so the Bible itself says clearly, our hearts are deceitful and it's desperately sick, and the sick needs a doctor. And so God now says, we can't understand it. We can't understand all the dynamics of the heart, but I am the one who searches the heart and deal with it accordingly. And so the heart of the human problem is a problem of the human heart, but only Jesus can transform our sinful, wicked hearts and bring in his godliness, his values and virtues into our lives. So when we read further scriptures, Proverbs 4:23 talks about keeping, guarding, watching our heart, because out of it flows all the issues of life. Everything comes out from our hearts, the way we think, the way we act, the way we behave, our lifestyle, everything boils down to heart issues. It's a heart issue. So keep your heart, guard your heart, watch your heart. Out of it flows all the issues of life. Everything that is pertaining to life and godliness all begins with the heart. So we've got to keep that in mind. Now, what are the 7 big sins? Number 1 is pride, of course. Pride. And what is pride? Pride is loving and esteeming oneself above others and above God. the root of all other sin. All right. So why do we say that? We know the love of money is the root of all evil, but the root of all sin, of other sins that follow, is pride. It begins with pride, because we love and esteem ourselves above others or above God, and we give value to us, and we think we are great. Like the other day I said, there are only two kinds of people at the end of the day: is those who say how great I am, and those who say how great thou art. To those who would say I did it my way, to those who said sorry, to those who said I did it God's way. To I did it God's way. So I did it my way, or I did it God's way. Now, pride can then slip into other areas. If we talk about personal pride, talk about national pride, also talked about spiritual pride, right? Religious pride, and then even spiritual pride that can creep into each of us. And we are not exempt. Just when we think that we are all right, we can be hit by pride. Lucifer, in the scriptures, we read of how he was, affected by pride, and that led to his fall. They say pride comes before a fall, and that's what it is in the history of mankind that we see. Wherever there was pride, that led to fall. And so we got to guard our hearts. Remember that verse of scripture, it says, three things are not of the Lord. It says the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. This is not from God, right? So we know then it is not from God, right? The origin of that is never God, right? Never equate that and think that, oh, okay, this has got something to do with God. God has nothing to do with that. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life is not from God our Father. It is always from the devil or from the flesh. And so we got to be careful. So we're looking at the heart of man. Number one, the first sin is pride. All right. So we talk about that. Number two is greed. Greed. We got to address that. All of these things can be taken in detail, and we can discuss and all that. Let me just give you an overview and see. Greed. What is greed? Greed is desiring material things to excess, placing too much importance on possessions. We should not allow our possessions to possess us. We got to be careful that the things that we own don't own us. We are supposed to master it, and we own it rather than our possessions possessing us. So we've got to be careful. Greed, desiring material things to excess, placing too much value, importance on possessions. So my house, my car, my phone, my this and that, and we can get caught in that. Hold everything loosely so that we are not attached to these things. Very, very important that we look into that. So pride, greed. The third one is anger. What is anger? We all have that issue. We all, have some amount of anger. I know there's righteous anger as well. Jesus got angry as well. So it's not that anger is wrong in every sense. But what is anger? Anger is acting in hostility or desiring revenge. And that's where anger gets into the sinful part. That's why the Bible says, be angry, but don't sin. So there is a place where you can be angry, but don't get into sin. When in the way you talk, in the way you kind of intent in your heart, should not go into revenge or kind of countering in a sense, because vengeance belongs to the Lord. Revenge belongs to the Lord. It's not in our capacity to do that. So we got to be careful with anger. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Remember? And so it's okay to be angry, but don't brood on it. Don't think of revenge and trying to get even with siblings or brothers and sisters or husband and wife or whatever. We got to be careful that we deal with anger. The next one is sloth, right? Denying God's will for the sake of comfort. We become lazy, avoiding either spiritual or physical work. There's a problem here. We either are too busy or we are too lazy. Busy is being under Satan's yoke, busy. It's being under Satan's yoke. But on the other hand, being lazy is also a problem. There are those who are hardworking, they're busy, and there are those who are hardly working, those who are not working at all. So you end up in sloth, you end up in a stage where you are simply lazy, and that is not something that helps. We got to talk about that. All right. So pride, greed, anger, sloth, and then we talk about gluttony. Gluttony is a sin. We love food. I'm a foodie too. I like food, different types of food. I enjoy food, but we don't slip into gluttony. And we don't live to eat. We eat to live. There's a big difference. We don't eat to live. We live to eat. Now, there are those who have a problem with gluttony, and the Bible does talk about gluttony as a sin. All right. As much as we don't like to hear it, gluttony is a sin. What is gluttony? It's consuming to an unhealthy excess where we overeat, and that becomes a problem. So, gluttons, the Bible calls them and addresses the sin of gluttony. We've got to be careful. Next is envy. Envy is resenting others for their possessions or gifts. So, right from the 10 Commandments, we've been saying, don't covet, do not covet, whether it is your neighbor's wife or husband or their possessions or their things. Don't do that. If you resent others for their possessions or gifts, or even somebody you see on stage and you kind of resent their gifts, you got to be careful that you don't become envious. This is football season, and you watch Ronaldo play, and half the world just hates him just because of who he is. Half the world hates him just because of envy, for nothing else, but just that, out of envy. And you've got to be careful that these are sins of the heart, that we don't resent others for their gifts and their talents, because God has endowed them with that, and we got to rejoice with other people's gifts, not become envious. There is something called holy jealousy, right? God says, don't worship any other. So that sense of a holy jealousy that is there, which is right. Like we talk about righteous anger, there's holy jealousy in that sense, but we don't become envious that we resent others. And also, of course, we can't we cannot not talk about this area of lust. Lust is considering others as mere objects of sexual desire. I think it was Tony Campolo who once said this. You can have two different types of relationships with people. I liked it. I heard it many years ago. He said you can either have an I-it relationship with people, or you can have an I-thou relationship with people. So when you have an I-it relationship with people, you use people. You see them as things to be used and abused and thrown away. That's how you look at it. But when you have an I-thou, not even I-you, I-thou relationship, you begin to value, you begin to kind of give impetus, you kind of give strength to that relationship, and you really keep it in worth. So, the problem with lust is that you consider others as just mere objects to be lusted after, particularly in terms of sexual desire. And God says that is wrong. There's a difference between love and lust. There's a difference between infatuation and lust. And we've got to be careful that we don't slip into that area. Many have fallen in that area. More people have fallen in any of these areas, all of these areas. That's pride, greed, anger, sloth, gluttony, envy, or lust. People have fallen. Even men of God, even women of God, saints of God have fallen in these areas, because these are issues of the heart. And if we are not careful, we can get into real problems. All of these sins can now be easily accessible to because of the digital world that we live in. And I read it somewhere, the 7 sins in the digital world today is basically these 7 things. And for everything you have an equivalent. For lust you have Tinder and other things that are there. For gluttony you have Yelp and all the food apps that are there, constantly trying to grab your attention to buy. Say, just eat. Just take that phrase, just eat. Just eat. That it's very suggestive. Somebody said somebody saw a billboard in America saying, "Don't just stand there, eat something." Constantly People are being pushed towards buying things and towards eating. So for gluttony, everything is there trying to grab our attention. Oh, it's football night, order a pizza. The suggestive things that always come. For greed, there's LinkedIn, and you want your profile and your business thing is there. For envy, of course, Facebook. Oh, your friend went to Portugal or Spain for holiday. Why didn't I go? Why couldn't we go? Or he got that award, and whether we rejoice in that or not. Facebook can have, with all the things that helps us, it also adds to the envy. For sloth, there's Netflix and Amazon and all of the things that can keep us as couch potatoes, keeps us more lazy than anything else. For wrath and anger, of course, Facebook is there, but Twitter, where you can comment on it, and social media can get really ugly. Your wrath, your anger is spilled on now to social media and how you comment and things. It's very interesting when you sometimes read the comments of people. All of that comes out from their heart is revealing. For pride, Instagram and other things. There are so many apps that are there, things that are there, the digital world that kind of helps or adds or multiplies these seven sins. We're not going to focus on that. We got to know these are there. But what are the virtues then? Now, interestingly, there are seven virtues, which is basically part of the heart of Christ and what Christ likeness gives us. The metamorphosis that happens in our life, or how we are changed from an ugly caterpillar to a beautiful butterfly. Christ likeness is what comes out. So what happens in the transformation? Instead of pride, you have humility. Instead of greed, you have generosity. Instead of anger, you have meekness. Instead of sloth, you have diligence. Instead of gluttony, you have temperance or self-control. Instead of envy, you have kindness. And instead of lust, you have charity or love. So you have seven sins on the one hand, basically reflecting the heart of man. Then you have seven virtues, which basically reflects the heart of Christ, which is our goal. All of our lives, our goal is nothing less than Christ likeness. I may want to be a better Bible teacher, better pastor, better preacher, better husband, better father. All of that is fine. But my ultimate goal is to please God and to be more like Jesus every day. And so Christ likeness is our goal. Each of our goals, we may have our goals, we may have our vision, but our primary goal is to be like Jesus, nothing else and nothing less. So here are the seven virtues. Humility. What is humility then? Humility is selflessness, right? Humility is not thinking, less of ourselves, but thinking in a sense that we're not thinking less of ourselves. We don't, oh, I'm. Sometimes people can go into a mode where say, oh, I'm just a worm. That's also in the Bible. I know, but oh, I'm just a worm. I'm nobody, and I'm just That's not the way it is. It's thinking less of ourselves. We don't think more about ourselves. We think about other people and about God and about the kingdom. That's where it is becomes selflessness. Recognizing that skills, talents, and all good qualities are gifts from God. So we don't lift up our own skills, our own talents, our own giftings, and our qualities so much that then we slip into pride. Rather, the opposite, where we are selfless. We are here to serve. We are to humble ourselves, and we recognize that all of these are gifts from God. And so, to those who are humble, our key phrase is, to God be the glory. So even when somebody comes and says, oh, you preached well, or that was a good match, or that was a good game, whatever, rather than taking the glory to ourselves, we say, to God be the glory, and that's the and we mean it when we say it. All right. So humility is selflessness, basically, not selfishness, but selflessness. So what is generosity? Generosity is giving of time, talents, and gifts freely, realizing that no material thing is more important than God. And that's generosity, a life of generosity where we give of ourselves. We spend and we are spent. We spend and we are spent, where we are generous with our time, generous with our gifts and talents. And we do it freely. Why? Because we freely received and we freely give. And so we realize no material thing is more important than God Himself. And so we do it all for the kingdom, having a lifestyle of generosity, humility, generosity. Here's a third one: meekness. Yes, instead of anger, meekness, acting with patience, mercy, and charity when resolving conflicts. Conflicts are going to happen, problems are going to happen in our life, but how do we handle that? And are we going to get angry all the time? Are we going to be meek and learn of Jesus, acting with patience, mercy, and charity when we resolve conflicts? These are areas that all of us struggle, but we learn every day. We need patience. When we say we need patience, we really mean it. Somebody said, God, give me patience, give it to me now. Huh? We can't be saying that to God. God, give me patience, give it to me now. We don't have the patience to receive the patience. Um, and here's the thing: if we don't have patience, we'll become a patient. Huh? We become a mental patient or something else. We become a patient. We got to have patience, and we got to learn that and to wait. Best way, sometimes I tell my family, is the best way to test our patience is when it comes to road rage. When you're stuck in traffic and somebody cuts you off or whatever. It doesn't happen much here in the UK, but it does. But sometimes you get angry and people don't follow the rules or whatever, things like that, and you're upset. But that is a test of your spirituality, of how meek you are. Were you patient? Are you forgiving? Oh, okay, he's a learner, or she's a lady, and got to be a little more gentle in terms of dealing with that situation. Or do we get angry and we immediately in trying to resolve the conflict, act out of anger and becomes hostile? Got to be careful. Diligence, instead of being slothful, diligence is following God's will, even if it means sacrificing comfort. Where we sacrifice comfort, we get out of the comfort zone, and we become diligent because we want to follow God's will. We want to use our energy and the years that God has given us to do what God's called us to do. We are diligent in what we do. We have a spirit of excellence in all that we do. What does the Bible say? Those who carry a spirit of excellence will not stand before ordinary men, will stand before royalty, will stand before kings and queens. And so we carry that spirit of excellence, that diligence into our work. God will bless the work of our hands and all that we do because we are diligent. And so the Bible says it commands us, be diligent, in all that you do in your work. So we don't cut corners, we don't look for shortcuts. We work and we follow God's will, and that will eventually call us to sacrifice our comforts, and we have to pay a price to be diligent, of course. Temperance is taking all things in moderation and to the point of goodness. We are temperate in the way we handle. So people ask about drinking. People ask about various things that you do. Are we doing it in moderation uh, to the point of goodness, or are we being gluttonous in one sense? We overdo things. Anything over extreme is wrong. Extremism will always lead to eccentricity. In India, we have a phrase which says, even amrit, which is nectar, too much of amrit is poison. Uh, Too much of sweetness, too much of even the good things can be, bitter. It can become bad. So there's a sense of moderation, temperance in all things that we do. We don't go extreme, because extremism, even in terms of our Christian life, sometimes with our doctrines and things like that, people can go extreme with one point and just go on a tangent. We've got to be careful that we are self-controlled and temperate in all things. We're not here to go on a tangent and go extreme, because that leads to eccentricity unless we are careful. So that's there. Kindness. The next one is kindness. What is kindness? Wishing the best for others. Brotherly love, wishing the best for others, that we celebrate each other, we encourage each other, we wish the best for the other person, that we are kind. The world is increasingly becoming rude, and we see that in the demonstrations and the protests and everything that's happening, whether it's online or on the streets. In spite of the pandemic regulations that are there, there's rage on the streets. but it's just the opposite is kindness. You know, just the opposite is kindness. We are not envious of things. We want to be kind. That even to somebody who doesn't smile, we smile. You know, there are people around me who look at me differently, maybe because of the color of the skin or whatever, or maybe just that I'm strange. You know, I'm different from them. And there are those who don't smile. There are those who never smile. But I realize the only way that I can break that is to be kind. And so I started smiling. When I started smiling, they started smiling back. And it didn't cost me a thing. A smile doesn't cost anything. You see, so if we learn to be kind, and suddenly that opens up avenues to smile and to talk. And there are many who now who say hello. There are many who wish good morning or good evening, whatever. And I find that interesting. It starts with us being kind, maybe just a word of encouragement, maybe a kind act, and that helps somebody, and it makes the world of a difference to that person. So a kind act, kind acts of kindness, very important that we practice that, and that's part of our Christian uh, discipleship. And lastly, chastity, love instead of lust, love, properly ordering physical appetites according to one's vocation. Now, we know that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. God has given us self control. Another word for that sound mind there in other translations is self control. God has given us self control. And so, love within a marriage relationship is holy. Outside of that, it becomes sinful. Lust is different from love. And so we got to be careful that we don't slip into that. As I said, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. God hates it. It's not from God. And we got to be careful that we move on that. Now, all of these things are kind of an additional list that I gave, apart from the fruit of the Spirit, as it's listed in Galatians. The fruit of the Spirit is basically Christ likeness. You can take one of each of that and expand and talk about it and discuss as well. But I just wanted kind of a counter for virtue for the sins. So for pride, you have humility. For greed, you have generosity. For anger, you have meekness. For sloth, you have diligence. For gluttony, you have temperance. You have for envy, you have kindness. For lust, you have love or chastity. So that we understand that our hearts need to be in the right place. So the heart of man reveals one, the heart of Christ reveals almost just the opposite. And we are in this journey of transformation where we move from the heart of man to the heart of Christ. So that when God searches our hearts, he would see his likeness in us. There was this Bible study where these women used to gather, and they were looking at this whole aspect of God refining the hearts of people. And they looked at that word. God sits in Malachi. It says God sits like a refiner's fire, and so they wanted to dig a little more deeper about that word refining. And so they said, let's go to a silversmith, work at work, and let's just go and talk. And so they went and found the silversmith working, and and seeing how the whole process of refining actually happens, where the silver is put into the fire, and it's kind of beaten up and into all shapes and this and that, and in the fire it is purified and refined, so that all the impurities leave, and the whole metal becomes valuable and worthy to be sold. It becomes pricey. So they asked questions to this guy. Say, how do you know that this is ready? How long do you keep it? And the answer was very fascinating. The silversmith said, if I can see my reflection on it, that means it is ready. And God does that in our lives, in the way he purifies us and refines us. He does that until he sees his reflection in us. And then we are usable, we are valuable, we can be used by the Lord. And so God searches our heart. One last passage of scripture just to sum this up in Psalm 139, where it talks about that beautiful prayer of searching our hearts. Search me, and that search me, O God, know my heart. Beautiful. And David realizes that basically it's a heart issue, and he wants to be transparent before the Lord. So I like that prayer that he makes, Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart, because Jeremiah the prophet said only God knows how a heart functions. And and he's inviting what God does best is in looking at our hearts and says, Lord, you search me, you know my heart, you try me, you know my thoughts, right? See if there's any grievous way in me, any wicked way in me, and you lead me in the way everlasting. What a beautiful prayer. And probably that's a prayer that we need to pray as well. Lord, search my heart, no matter where we are in our Christian walk, in our maturity, leadership, whatever we are. But Lord, let my heart be like the heart of Christ. And these are areas that I struggle with. Lord, I give it to you so that you change my heart. You move me to Christ likeness every day. And so, Lord, this time I come before you and I say, Lord, search my heart. I give my heart to you because you know the depths of my being. You know the intentions, motivations of my heart. Would you search me like an X-ray machine, like a spiritual X-ray? Would you know my heart? Would you try me and know my thoughts? And if you see if any grievous way, will you lead me? Will you correct me in the way everlasting? What a beautiful prayer for us to pray. Lord, would you search me, examine me? Would you investigate me? Would you try me, test me, so that I can come out as through refiner's fire to be pure gold, pure silver, something valuable, something that can be useful for God's glory. Make that our prayer. And so these are things that I thought I'll just share. We can expand, we can talk about it, discuss, take each one of it, and do that as well. But just thought, just broadly speaking, these are issues of the heart that needs our attention and God's attention. So God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Come and join us at Fresh Start Scotland